Good evening and welcome to this new season of Vatican Connections. I'm your host, Emanuela Orlandi. And yes, we're back for season 5 of our program that brings you all the latest news and behind-the-scenes stories directly from the Vatican. In the past week, there has been a lot going on, and here are just some of the stories that we bring you tonight. The Vatican Secretary of State makes an official comment about the bones found at the Vatican Nunziature. Could they be a clue that ends a 35-year-old mystery? The Pope's monthly prayer intention video is out for November, and what he's asking us to pray for is not surprising considering the centennial anniversary that the world just celebrated on Monday. And during the Holy Father's Angelus on Sunday, he drew attention to 3 important dates, and we have for you what those dates are and a summary of what he said. And the Grand Master of the Knights of the Holy Sepulcher spoke at a press conference in Rome last week and had some interesting things to say about the tens of millions of dollars they give away each year, and we were there for you. All this and more on Vatican Connections, coming up next. Okay, let's first begin with the Pope's words after his weekly recitation of the Angelus on Sunday. As you know, the Holy Father has a custom of greeting pilgrims at St. Peter's Square from the window of his study every Sunday. Have you ever wondered, however, how this custom began and how it started? I'll have that for you shortly, but first, here's a summary of the Pope's message of that day from Vatican News.
Ieri a Barcellona è avvenuta la beatificazione di padre Teodoro Ilera dell'Olmo e 15 compagni martiri.
Pope Francis announced that Father Teodoro Ilera of Olma and 15 other Spanish martyrs were beatified. The beatification ceremony took place in Barcelona on Saturday. The group, Pope Francis explained, is composed of 13 men and women religious and 3 lay people. 9 of the newly beatified were religious and lay people who belonged to the congregation of St. Peter in Chains. 3 of them were women religious from the Capuchins of the Mother of the Divine Shepherd, and 1 was a sister of the Franciscans of the Sacred Heart. All of them lost their lives due to the faith in different parts of Spain and on different dates during the religious persecution that took place during the Spanish Civil War in the last century. Pope Francis ended the announcement saying, "Let us praise the Lord for these courageous witnesses."
Ricorre oggi il centenario della fine della Prima Guerra Mondiale.
Today marks the centenary of the end of the First World War, which my predecessor, Benedict XV, defined as the useless slaughter, Pope Francis said. Bells throughout the world are to ring at 1:30 p.m. Italian time to honor the date, he said. He also said that World War I is a strong warning to reject the culture of war and to seek every legitimate means to put an end to those conflicts that are still making blood flow in many regions of the world.
E come segno emblematico prendiamo quello del grande San Martino di Tours.
He proposed St. Martin of Tours on his feast day as a symbol of investing in peace. He cut his cloak in 2 to share it with a poor man. May this gesture of human solidarity indicate to everyone the way toward constructing peace, Pope Francis said. The final date the Pope spoke of is the Second World Day for the Poor, to be celebrated next Sunday with many initiatives. He said that a first aid station will be set up in St. Peter's Square, where those in need can receive medical care. I hope that this day will encourage greater attention to the needs of the least and the marginalized, he said.
So we all know that the Pope informally greets pilgrims from his balcony every Sunday after reciting the Angelus. Have you ever wondered how that tradition began and who started it? Interestingly enough, this short informal address is a recent custom in the Church, which began on a particularly meaningful day in history. That date, oddly, was the first Sunday Angelus address, was held on Wednesday, February the 11th, 1959, and started with John the 23rd, the Pope responsible for opening the Second Vatican Council. Not only was that date the start of Lent that year, it was also the anniversary of the Marian apparition at Lourdes. John the 23rd made specific mention of that significance, especially since on that particular day marked the conclusion of the centennial celebration of the Marian apparitions. Now, after this first Angelus address, John the 23rd only made a few Sunday appearances throughout his pontificate, and it wasn't until Pope Paul VI that this Sunday Angelus appearance became established part of the Holy Father's activities, one which every pope since has continued. And now you know. Now, you may have heard that 2 weeks ago, a fully intact skeleton was found during the renovations of a building attached to the Vatican's embassy to Italy, just miles from the Vatican itself. Since then, local Italian media has been wildly speculating that the remains could be that of Emanuela Orlandi, the 15-year-old daughter of a Vatican employee who was presumably kidnapped in 1983. Now, with the remains undergoing DNA testing, much of Rome, including the Vatican, has been on pins and needles, waiting to see who the remains belong to and whether they could be related somehow to the most speculated cold case in modern Italian history. According to Italian news site ANSA, the remains believed to be belonging to a woman based on initial examination, but a profile won't be released until the DNA testing is completed in the next 7 to 10 days. Now, the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, responded to journalists last week about this case, saying that there has been no connection made with this and Emanuela Orlandi by the Holy See, and said, "I don't know who connected this with the Orlandi case." And when asked by journalists why the Vatican Secretary of State involved the Italian authorities, the Cardinal explained that it was simply done in order to be transparent, so that there would be no accusation that the Holy See has anything to do or anything to hide. Human remains were found, he said, and there is a desire to get to the bottom of what was done. And so, he had asked the help of the Italian authorities. Now, clearly at this point, it's simply too early to speculate who the remains belong to. So why, you have to wonder, is this such a big story in the Italian media? Well, for years, theories have surfaced that Orlandi was kidnapped in order to put pressure on the Vatican not to reveal financial activities of members of the mafia who allegedly had their hands in the Vatican's pockets. Others believe she fell victim to a sex ring in which members of the Vatican police and other diplomats participated in. And yet others linked her disappearance to that of another girl, to the possible attempts by international terrorists to force the release of the Turkish assassin who tried to kill St. John Paul II back in 1981. So with all of this, you can imagine the almost celebrity-like status of this case has had in the Italian tabloids for the past 25 years. Well, I guess we'll know shortly soon enough. Also last week in Rome, the Cardinal Grand Master of the Knights of the Holy Sepulcher addressed the world media at the Vatican Press Center, where he answered questions about the millions of dollars that the Knights of the Holy Sepulcher gives to Catholic projects in the Holy Land. And we were there at the press conference to bring you this.
How much money, like annually, would the order give to the Latin Patriarchate? And is it a grant-making process, or is it simply turning a percentage of the funds raised directly over to the Patriarchate? Thanks.
Good, thank you. We don't keep track of the pilgrimages, but my impression is, and most of my time is spent in traveling to meet all our different lieutenancies wherever they are. And I would say that every lieutenancy makes one pilgrimage a year. In some cases, like in Germany, I think there are 2 or 3 pilgrimages they make, and others could be said England as well, and certainly throughout the United States. So it's a regular occurrence, one that is very much appreciated and looked forward to by the Patriarchate and by the people, because when we do go, we go to the holy places, but also visit the projects that our people are supporting. As far as financing, I would think we could say about $15 million a year. About 80% of the Patriarchate's budget is donated by the men and women of our lieutenancies, and they are grants. We have a committee of 3 people who 3 times a year visit the Holy Land and monitor what progress is taking place in the various projects that we're involved in, as well as with the projects we've taken on from Ruaco. So it's a very well-organized thing, great cooperation with Archbishop Pizzaballa and his people, great ecumenical interfaith. I've been always struck by the relationships between Christians and Muslims there, and certainly among the Christian groups. There's great unity, great harmony, great collaboration.
But the obligation, though, of a pilgrimage is just once in a lifetime. It's not once a year,
That's
right?
right.
Okay.
No. But I say if a lieutenancy makes it once a year, it gives an opportunity for everyone in time to choose when they will go. And some people will go on, every year they'll go on a pilgrimage. That's not unusual, but that's not the obligation. The suggestion is as often as possible, but certainly once in a lifetime.
Now, the 30,000 members of the Order of the Holy Sepulcher funds a staggering $15 million a year in grants to Catholic projects in the Holy Land to ensure that Catholic parishes, seminaries, schools, and hospitals continue to function. The Grand Master Cardinal O'Brien said the Knights are not involved in local government or politics, but are only there to support the local Catholic Church. Now, who exactly are the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulcher? What do they do? And where do they come from? All the answers to those questions is up next.
The Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulcher of Jerusalem is nearly 1,000 years old, started by our founder, Godfrey de Bouillon, at the time of the First Crusade. And our mission remains unchanged over 900 years, which is the defense of the Holy Land, the holy places, and the Christians in the Holy Land.
It's no longer that we strap on swords and ride horses to go forward to defend the rights of the Church, but instead we pledge our monetary support to pay for the upkeeping of the holy places in the Holy Land, and also to provide educational benefits to all people, regardless of whether they be Christian or not.
Some Catholics pray, some Catholics evangelize, some Catholics give to the poor in support of the Church. But we as Knights are called to do all three.
The Knights and Ladies of the Holy Sepulchre support the Latin Patriarch in his endeavor to keep the Christians in the Holy Land. We support schools, housing, education, and the Holy Family Hospital.
With the politics of the region, it's getting more and more difficult for the Christian community to remain there because people are leaving. And so we need to be able to make sure as an order that we do everything we can to continue a Christian presence.
Much of the secular world doesn't realize the stabilizing influence that the Christians have in the Holy Land, despite representing only 2% of the population. Their presence essentially ensures that the Jewish community and the Muslim community don't have at one another.
The only way for peace to have a chance in the Holy Land is for the Church to remain there, to do what she does best. If the Christian presence in the Holy Land were to disappear, holy places would become nothing more than museums. We would not be able to worship in the places where salvation history took place. What does that say about us if we can't support the Catholic Church in the Holy Land to the extent that the Christians feel comfortable in remaining there?
If we're no longer able to have those freedoms in our own cradle, it would certainly put the jeopardy of our faith throughout the world. In these days when faith is waning and people no longer have hope, though it is only a city and brick and mortar, it is something that we can look to that substantiates our faith and keeps us looking toward the Mother Church.
Every month, the Holy Father releases a monthly prayer intention video where he invites the faithful to join him in praying for a very specific intention. This month, that intention is that the language of love and dialogue prevail over the language of conflict. Have a look.
Todos queremos la paz, y más que nadie la quieren aquellos que sufren por la ausencia de paz. Podemos hablar con palabras espléndidas, pero si en nuestro corazón no hay paz, no la habrá en el mundo. Con cero violencia y 100% de ternura, construyamos la paz evangélica que no excluye a nadie. Recemos juntos para que el lenguaje del corazón y del diálogo prevalezca siempre sobre el lenguaje de las armas.
A developing story comes to you now from the U.S. At the urging of the Vatican, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops will not vote on two proposals they are planning to discuss at their Baltimore meeting regarding their response to the clergy sex abuse in the U.S. Conference President Cardinal Daniel DiNardo informed bishops yesterday, as they opened their fall General Assembly, that the Vatican wanted bishops not to vote on those matters until after February, meeting with the Pope and the presidents of the bishops' conferences from around the world convene to discuss clergy abuse on a global level.
Dear brothers, I need to open our time together with an important announcement. At the insistence of the Holy See, we will not be voting on the two action items in our documentation regarding the abuse crisis, that is, the standards of accountability for bishops and the Special Commission for receiving complaints against bishops. The Holy See has asked that we delay voting on these so that our deliberations can inform and be informed by the global meeting of the conference presidents that the Holy Father has called for February 2019. I'm sorry for the late notice, but in fact, this was conveyed to me late yesterday afternoon. Although I am disappointed that we will not be taking these actions tomorrow in terms of vote, I remain hopeful that this additional consultation will ultimately improve our response to the crisis we face.
It is clear that the Holy See is taking seriously the abuse crisis in the Church, seeing it as a watershed moment, not just for the Church in this country, but around the world, in putting so much emphasis on the February meeting. At the same time, as you are our representative going to that meeting, we need to be very clear with you where we stand, and we need to tell our people where we stand. And so I would suggest that we carry on our discussions on these documents, that we fine-tune them through our understanding, debate, and the ways that amendments can be proposed, and that instead of taking a binding vote as an action item, we take a resolution ballot, so that we can communicate to you as you go to that meeting representing us where we stand and what we need to say in that discussion. I also would then suggest, given the urgency of this moment, that instead of waiting until June, we have a special session in March to deal precisely with this issue. We need as a conference, as brother bishops, to take up this issue for the good of the Church in this country without delay. We can benefit from the discussions that happen in February. In fact, may find some new insights that we had not thought of. But we need to act soon, without delay. I realize that having a meeting in March will be a logistic headache for staff and for all of our calendars, but it is something that we cannot delay. There's an urgency here. And so I would ask you and the leadership of the conference to give consideration to that, and maybe as we meet tomorrow to discuss this particular proposal and get a sense of the House if we can proceed this way. Thank you.
Thanks, Cardinal Subich. I think that's something we could probably bring up tomorrow to the brethren as we do the agenda and move on with the meeting tomorrow.
The Cardinal's startling announcement came 2 days after the Pope met with Archbishop Christophe Pierre, the Apostolic Nuncio to the U.S. at the Vatican. Archbishop Pierre returned to the U.S. on Sunday just in time for the first day of the U.S. Bishops' General Assembly in Baltimore. And I'll have more for you on this next week. And finally tonight, the Vatican hosted last week an international conference that explored Syriac Christianity. The two-day conference entitled Syriac Christianity at the Crossroads of Cultures gathered researchers from all the world at the Pontifical Oriental Institute in Rome last week. Oxford University professor Sebastian Brock spoke at the conference about St. Ephrem, the Syrian's contribution to Syriac Christianity.
The Luminous Eye, it took its origin, and it's the name of a book, and the book is about St. Ephrem. And St. Ephrem's a poet, but also a theologian. And what he's doing, he's saying that the way to understand the relationship between the human world and the divine world is through what he sees as God's means of self-revelation by means of the term raza, mystery, symbol, pointer, and in the plural raze, and these mysteries, symbols are hidden both in the natural world and in the biblical text. And in order to see them, if you have no faith, you won't see them, and that's why people don't see them. But the moment you see that rational explanation doesn't explain everything, and that's maybe there's something else, and it's that initial leap of faith that allows you just to see the dim existence of at least some of these most obvious raze. It, as it were, increases more and more. It becomes more and more luminous. And then ultimately, and it's only people like Ephrem who have a truly luminous eye, you see them everywhere. And he, in one poem, ends up saying, "Help, I'm sinking in the sea, the ocean of raze, of mysteries, symbols," and he needs to be drawn out into sort of forget about them for the moment. And then he says, "I'd like to come back later. I've had enough." It's rather like having a delicious banquet. Another thing that I think is very much present in Ephrem's understanding is the need for synergy, cooperation with the Holy Spirit. And so, in a way, the growth of faith is a growth of cooperation. And so it needs an effort on the individual's part, and that effort is sort of cooperating with the Spirit. The more that the interior eye of the heart perceives these mysteries, the more it will understand about the relationship between the divine world and the human world, because the raze, these symbols are, for Ephrem, God's means of revealing himself to humanity. Because a very important concept in Ephrem is that the human individual has complete liberty. This is the initial gift. And it's how you use that liberty. And you can use it to block off any sort of communication with God, or you can, through the right use of the interior eye and the growth of faith and growth of basically cooperation with the work of the Spirit, then you see more and more of what the divine reality is.
And that's our show for you this week. We'd love to hear from you about the stories that we bring to you, and also any questions that you'd like us to answer for you in upcoming episodes. Feel free to connect with us on Facebook and Twitter on our page listed below. I'm Noel Okel, and thank you for joining us.